Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Have you ever spent years learning English? Memorizing grammar rules, studying vocabulary lists, watching lesson after lesson, and still frozen completely when someone suddenly asks you a simple question in English? Have you ever understood English in your head, but felt nothing come out of your mouth when it actually mattered? Have you ever felt embarrassed because you knew you were not lazy, you knew you were trying hard, but somehow your speaking still felt slow, nervous, unnatural, and painful? Have you ever watched someone speak English confidently and secretly wondered what they knew that you did not? Because deep inside, you feel like you should already be better by now. And maybe the hardest part is not even the language itself. Maybe the hardest part is the disappointment, the feeling of studying so much, but still feeling trapped inside silence. Every time real conversation begins, if that feeling hurts, then listen carefully, because this may completely change the way you see English forever. The problem is not your intelligence. It is not your memory, and it is not because you are bad at languages. The real problem is that the system taught you to study English instead of training your brain to live with English naturally, because real fluency is not built through memorization alone. It is built through immersion, shadowing, understandable input, active recall, and speaking from the very first day. And nobody taught you that your brain learns language through repeated exposure, emotional connection, constant listening, real speaking, and daily interaction, not through endless fear of mistakes. And that is why today you are about to discover something powerful. Fluency is not created by studying harder. Fluency is created by training your brain differently. And once you finally understand how these 5 methods work together, your English may begin changing faster than you ever thought possible. And if you feel frustrated after years of trying to learn English without becoming truly confident, I want you to understand something important right now. This is not only your struggle, this is the struggle of millions of learners who were taught English in a way that trained fear more than communication, because the traditional system made you believe fluency comes from memorizing enough grammar rules before speaking. So you spent years preparing instead of actually building the speaking brain itself. And slowly, you began doubting yourself. Maybe you thought your pronunciation was bad. Maybe your memory was weak. Maybe you were simply not talented enough to become fluent. But the truth is much more hopeful than that, because the problem was never your potential. The problem was the method. Your brain was never trained the way language is naturally acquired. Nobody taught you that the brain learns fastest through immersion, through hearing English daily until it becomes familiar. Nobody taught you the power of shadowing, where repeating native speech trains rhythm, speed, pronunciation, and confidence at the same time. Nobody taught you that comprehensible input matters more than difficult textbooks, because the brain learns language best when it understands enough to stay engaged without feeling overwhelmed. Nobody taught you how active recall and spaced repetition help the brain remember vocabulary naturally over time, instead of forgetting everything after 1 week. And most importantly, nobody taught you to speak from day one. Because real fluency grows through use, not through endless preparation. And this is why so many learners understand English, but still cannot speak naturally. They were trained to analyze English instead of live with it. They became students of the language instead of users of the language. And over time, English became associated with stress, correction, hesitation, and fear instead of communication and connection. But once you finally understand how these 5 methods work together, something powerful changes inside you. Because now English stops feeling like an impossible mountain of rules and starts feeling like a trainable daily skill. And for the first time, you realize fluency is not reserved for gifted people. Fluency is what happens when the brain receives the right kind of exposure, repetition, speaking practice, and emotional familiarity consistently over time. I still remember the moment I realized something was deeply wrong with the way I had been learning English for years, because on paper it looked like I was doing everything correctly. I studied grammar every day, memorized vocabulary lists, completed exercises, watched educational lessons, and spent countless hours trying to improve. But in real-life conversations, I still felt nervous, slow, and mentally frozen. And that disconnect hurt more than people realize, because it creates a terrible feeling inside you. The feeling that all your effort is somehow invisible when you actually need to communicate. And I remember one specific moment that stayed in my mind for a long time. Someone asked me a simple question in English, and even though I understood it perfectly, my brain suddenly went blank. I started translating in my head, searching for perfect grammar, overthinking every word, and by the time I finally formed a sentence, the moment was already gone. And afterward, I felt embarrassed, because deep inside, I knew I understood more English than I could actually use. And for a long time, I thought the answer was simple. Study harder, memorize more grammar, learn more vocabulary. But strangely, the harder I tried through traditional studying alone, the more disconnected English felt from real-life communication. And then, little by little, everything began changing when I accidentally started using completely different methods without realizing how powerful they were. I started surrounding myself with English every day through Immersion, listening to podcasts while walking, watching English videos during meals, hearing natural speech constantly until English stopped sounding so foreign. Then I discovered shadowing and began repeating native speakers out loud, copying rhythm, speed, pronunciation, and emotional tone, instead of only memorizing words silently. And at first, it felt uncomfortable. But slowly my speaking became smoother and more automatic. Then I stopped forcing myself to consume material far above my level and focused on comprehensible input. Instead, content I could mostly understand while still learning naturally from context. And suddenly, listening became less stressful and much more enjoyable. Then I learned active recall and spaced repetition, and for the first time, vocabulary actually stayed in my memory because I was reviewing naturally over time instead of cramming and forgetting. And finally, I made the biggest change of all. I stopped waiting to become perfect before speaking and started speaking from day one, even with mistakes, even with fear, even with simple sentences, because I realized fluency grows through use, not preparation. And when all 5 of these methods began working together, something incredible happened. English slowly stopped feeling like a school subject and started feeling like part of my real life. My listening improved faster. My reactions became quicker. My confidence grew naturally. And for the first time, I understood what real language learning actually feels like. Not painful memorization, but gradual adaptation through daily exposure, repetition, speaking, understanding, and emotional familiarity. And that realization changed not only my English, but the entire way I viewed learning forever. So here is the big idea that connects all 5 methods together and completely changes the way you understand fluency. Your brain does not learn language best through isolated memorization. Your brain learns language through repeated, meaningful exposure, emotional familiarity, active use, and constant adaptation over time. And this is exactly why immersion, shadowing, comprehensible input, active recall with spaced repetition, and speaking from day one are so powerful when combined together, because each method trains a different part of the language system inside your brain naturally. Immersion surrounds your mind with English daily until the language stops feeling foreign and starts feeling familiar. Shadowing trains your pronunciation, rhythm, speaking speed, and listening reactions by forcing your brain to copy real speech patterns in real time. Comprehensible input feeds your brain understandable English that stretches your ability without overwhelming you. Active recall and spaced repetition strengthen memory by reviewing information exactly when your brain is about to forget it, and speaking from day one destroys the fear of communication before perfectionism has time to control you completely. And together these methods create something the traditional system often fails to build, a real speaking brain, because fluency is not one skill. Fluency is many small systems working together automatically through repetition and exposure, listening, reacting, understanding, remembering, pronouncing, connecting ideas, and speaking without constant fear or translation. And the reason most learners struggle for years is because they train these systems separately or ignore some of them completely. They study grammar but never immerse themselves. They memorize vocabulary but never speak. They listen passively but never shadow actively. They understand lessons but never train recall. And slowly, English becomes something they know about instead of something they can actually use naturally. But when all 5 methods work together consistently, something incredible begins happening inside the brain. English starts moving from conscious effort into automatic instinct. Common phrases become familiar. Reactions become faster. Pronunciation becomes smoother. Vocabulary stays longer in memory, and speaking begins feeling more natural because the brain has experienced the language repeatedly in meaningful contexts. Instead of isolated exercises, And this is why language learning should feel more like adaptation than academic study. Because the human brain was built to absorb language through use, repetition, sound, emotion, context, and communication. Not endless fear of making mistakes. And once you finally understand that deeply, you stop chasing fluency through pressure and begin building it naturally through daily systems that train your brain the way language is actually learned in real life. Let me show you what these 5 methods actually look like in real life, because this is where many learners suddenly realizes why their old system never felt natural. Imagine 2 different people trying to improve their English. The first person spends 2 hours studying grammar rules, memorizing vocabulary lists, and translating sentences silently in their head, then closes the book and returns to a completely non-English environment for the rest of the day, while the second person may study less formally, but uses all 5 methods together naturally throughout daily life. They wake up and immediately hear English through a podcast. While getting ready, this is immersion, because the brain starts the day surrounded by English sounds and patterns. Then while listening, they repeat short phrases out loud like, "I totally agree," or "that makes sense." This is shadowing because they are training pronunciation, rhythm, and automatic speaking reactions at the same time. Later, they watch a YouTube video they can mostly understand without feeling overwhelmed, maybe around 80% understandable. This is comprehensible input because the brain learns best when content is challenging, but still emotionally comfortable. Then, throughout the day, they use active recall by testing themselves naturally. Instead of rereading vocabulary passively, they ask questions like, "How do I say this idea in English?" Or "What was that phrase from the video earlier?" And later, spaced repetition happens when those same words return naturally through repeated exposure over several days instead of one stressful memorization session. And finally, they speak from day one by describing simple thoughts in English during normal life, like, "I'm tired today," or "I need to finish this work," even if the sentences are imperfect, because communication begins through use, not perfection. And now think about what happens after several months. The second learner has trained listening, speaking, memory, pronunciation, reaction speed, and emotional comfort with English every single day in real contexts, while the first learner mainly trained conscious analysis. And this is why one learner begins sounding more natural even without studying harder, because the brain adapts fastest when language is experienced repeatedly through multiple systems working together. And here is another powerful example. Imagine someone watches the same short English clip every day for 1 week. The first day they barely understand it. The pronunciation feels too fast, and they feel frustrated, but they continue immersing themselves in it daily. They shadow small parts repeatedly. They consume comprehensible explanations around it. They test their memory through active recall. And they speak simple sentences using phrases from the clip immediately. And after 1 week, something incredible happens. The clip suddenly feels slow, understandable, familiar, and emotionally comfortable. Because the brain adapted through repetition and exposure, and that moment creates a powerful realization. Fluency is not magic. Fluency is what happens when the brain experiences English consistently enough to stop treating it like a foreign threat and start treating it like a familiar communication system used naturally every day. So now the important question becomes very practical. How do you actually use these five methods together in daily life without feeling overwhelmed? And the answer is much simpler than most people expect, because you do not need to study English for 10 exhausting hours a day. You need a repeatable system that trains your brain consistently through small actions connected to real life. So here is a simple daily system you can start immediately. First, begin your morning with immersion before your native language completely takes over your brain. When you wake up, play 5 or 10 minutes of English audio, maybe a podcast, maybe a YouTube video, maybe a short interview. And do not stress about understanding every word. The goal is exposure, because daily immersion trains the brain to feel emotionally comfortable hearing English regularly. Then immediately combine immersion with shadowing by repeating 1 or 2 short sentences out loud, exactly as the speaker says them. Copy the rhythm, speed, emotion, and pronunciation naturally, even if it feels awkward at first, because shadowing trains your speaking muscles and listening reactions simultaneously. Then, during the day, use comprehensible input instead of consuming content that feels impossibly difficult. Choose English videos, podcasts, books, or conversations where you can understand most of the message while still learning new words naturally from context. Because the brain learns fastest when it feels challenged, but not overwhelmed. And throughout the day, use act recall naturally by testing yourself instead of passively rereading information. For example, after watching a video, ask yourself, what did they talk about? Or what phrases do I remember? Because forcing the brain to retrieve information strengthens memory dramatically more than passive review, and then spaced repetition happens when you revisit important phrases again later in the day, the next morning, or a few days later, because repeated exposure over time tells the brain this information matters, keep it. And finally, the most important rule of all, speak from day one, every single day, even with mistakes. Describe your actions in English. React to videos out loud. Answer simple questions to yourself. Speak small thoughts naturally during daily life. Because fluency grows through use, not preparation. And what makes this system so powerful is that all 5 methods support each other at the same time. Immersion creates familiarity, shadowing improves speaking rhythm, comprehensible input builds understanding, active recall strengthens memory, spaced repetition locks patterns into long-term memory, and speaking from day one removes fear before perfectionism can stop your progress. And when you repeat this process daily, something incredible happens. English slowly stops feeling like something you study and starts becoming something your brain experiences naturally every day. And that is the moment real fluency finally begins growing beneath the surface automatically. Right now, I do not want this to stay as motivation only. I want you to actually feel what these 5 methods are like when they work together in real time, because understanding English learning intellectually is not enough. Your brain changes through experience, repetition, and action. So let's practice together right now in a very simple way. First, imagine you wake up tomorrow morning, and instead of immediately opening content in your native language, you hear 1 minute of natural English audio, maybe someone casually saying, "Today, we're going to talk about building better habits." This is immersion, because your brain immediately begins the day hearing English naturally instead of treating it like rare study material. Now repeat that sentence out loud exactly as you hear it. Today, we're going to talk about building better habits. Watch. Again, faster this time. Copy the rhythm and emotion naturally. This is shadowing because you are training pronunciation, speaking flow, listening speed, and reaction timing simultaneously. Now imagine you continue listening and understand most of what the speaker says. Even if a few words are unfamiliar, maybe around 70 or 80% understandable. This is comprehensible input, because your brain learns best when content is understandable enough to stay emotionally engaged without panic. Now pause and ask yourself, what was the main idea of that sentence? Or what phrase do I remember? This is active recall, because your brain becomes stronger when it retrieves informations instead of only consuming it passively. Then later in the day, you hear the same phrase again in another video or podcast, and suddenly it feels more familiar, easier, and more automatic. This is spaced repetition, because repeated exposure over time strengthens memory naturally. And now come the final and most important step. Speak from day one. I want you to say your own sentence right now using the same pattern. Maybe, "Today I'm going to improve my English." Or, "Today I want to practice speaking more." Do not wait for perfect grammar. Do not stop to analyze every word. Just communicate. Because this is how fluency is actually built, through repeated real-world interaction with the language. And now notice something powerful. All 5 methods just work together naturally in less than a few minutes. Immersion exposed your brain to English. Shadowing trained your speaking system. Comprehensible input kept the experience understandable. Active recall strengthened memory. Spaced repetition reinforced familiarity. And speaking from day one activated communication immediately. And this is exactly why these methods feel so much more alive than traditional studying, because instead of treating English like information to memorize, they trained your brain to interact with English like a real language used in everyday life. And the more often you repeat this process daily, even imperfectly, the faster your brain adapts to English naturally without forcing every sentence consciously anymore. Now, this is where everything changes on a deeper level, because the biggest transformation is not only happening in your English ability, it is happening in the way you see yourself. For a long time, you may have believed that fluent people are simply more talented, more confident, or somehow naturally gifted with languages, while you saw yourself as someone still struggling, still preparing, still waiting for the future moment when you would finally feel ready to speak English naturally. But that mindset quietly traps millions of learners because it keeps English emotionally distant from their real identity. And the longer English feels distant, the harder it becomes for the brain to relax around the language. Naturally, and this is exactly why these 5 methods are so powerful together, because they slowly change not only your skills, but your relationship with English itself. Immersion makes English feel familiar instead of foreign. Shadowing makes speaking feel active instead of passive. Comprehensible input removes overwhelm and creates emotional comfort. Active recall proves your memory is stronger than you thought. Spaced repetition shows that forgetting is normal and temporary. And speaking from day one destroys the illusion that you must become perfect before communicating. And over time, something incredible begins happening inside you. You stop feeling like a student desperately trying to learn English and start becoming a person who actually lives with English daily. And that identity shift changes everything because confidence is not created through positive thinking alone. Confidence is created through repeated evidence. Every time you understand a sentence naturally, every time you repeat a phrase successfully, every time you remember vocabulary without translating, every time you speak even imperfectly, your brain receives proof that English is becoming part of your real life, and slowly fear begins losing its control because the language no longer feels emotionally dangerous. It feels familiar, and familiarity is one of the hidden foundations of fluency because the brain learns fastest in environments where it feels safe enough to experiment, communicate, and make mistakes naturally. And this is why traditional systems often fail emotionally. They create pressure before comfort, perfection before communication, and fear before adaptation. But friend, real fluency grows in the opposite direction. First, the brain becomes familiar with the language, then comfortable, then confident, and finally natural. And once you understand that deeply, you stop asking, how long will fluency take? And begin asking, how can I live around English every single day? Because fluency is not a magical finish line reached by a few lucky people. Fluency is what happens when someone consistently trains their brain through immersion, shadowing, understandable imsut, active recall, repetition, and speaking until English slowly becomes part of who they are instead of something they only study from a distance. Now, I want to challenge you to do something that may completely change the way your brain experiences English forever. And the challenge is simple but powerful. For the next 7 days, stop treating English like a school subject you occasionally study and start treating it like a living environment that surrounds your daily life. And during these 7 days, you are going to use all 5 methods together exactly the way real fluency is built naturally. So here are the rules. Every morning, begin with immersion. Before your native language fully enters your brain, listen to English audio immediately after waking up, even if it is only 5 or 10 minutes, because this trains your mind to accept English as part of normal life from the beginning of the day. Then use shadowing every single day by repeating short phrases out loud, exactly as native speakers say them. Copy their rhythm, pronunciation, speed, and emotion naturally, because your speaking system improves through imitation much faster than silent study. Then spend at least 20 minutes with comprehensible input, videos, podcasts, books, or conversations that you mostly understand without feeling overwhelmed. Because your brain learns language fastest when it feels challenged but emotionally comfortable at the same time. And throughout the day, use active recall constantly by forcing yourself to remember phrases naturally. Instead of rereading passively, ask yourself questions like, how would I say this in English? Or what phrase did I hear earlier? Because retrieval strengthens memory dramatically, and let spaced repetition happen naturally by revisiting the same important phrases over several days until they become automatic. And finally, the most important part of this challenge, speak from day one every single day, even if you feel nervous. Speak simple thoughts while walking. Describe your actions, react to videos out loud, answer imaginary questions, and record yourself speaking for 1 minute every night about your day in English. Because communication grows through use, not preparation. And during these 7 days, I do not want you to focus on perfection at all. Your only goal is exposure, repetition, and interaction. Because this challenge is not about proving how good your English already is. It is about teaching your brain to stop fearing English and start adapting to it naturally through daily contact. And at first, your brain may resist. You may feel mentally tired, awkward, or frustrated. But if you continue, something incredible begins happening. Common phrases start feeling familiar. Listening becomes easier. Your reactions become faster. And English slowly stops feeling like a foreign system you must constantly analyze, because now your brain is finally training the way language is naturally acquired through immersion, repetition, understanding, memory, and real communication. And if you seriously complete this challenge for 7 days, your relationship with English may begin changing more than years of passive studying ever did. Because for the first time, you are no longer only learning about English, you are actually living with English every single day. So now everything comes down to one decision. Are you going to continue learning English the old way? Always preparing, always waiting, always hoping confidence will magically appear someday? Or are you finally ready to train your brain through real exposure, real speaking, real listening, and real daily interaction with the language? Because the truth is, fluency was never meant to come from memorizing rules alone. Fluency grows when immersion surrounds your life, when shadowing trains your voice, when comprehensible input feeds your brain understandable English every day, when active recall strengthens memory naturally, and when speaking from day one teaches your mind that communication matters more than perfection. And right now, I want you to stop waiting until your English still feels perfect before you speak. Because confidence is not the beginning of fluency. Confidence is the result of repeated daily action. Every podcast you hear, every sentence you repeat, every word you remember, Every simple thought you say in English is slowly transforming your brain beneath the surface, even if you cannot see the progress immediately. And one day something incredible happens. You suddenly realize you are understanding more without translating, reacting faster without panic, speaking with less hesitation, and feeling emotionally comfortable around English for the first time, not because you became magically talented overnight, but because your brain adapted naturally through these 5 methods, working together consistently over time. And this is why I do not want you to leave this video inspired for only 1 hour and then return to old habits tomorrow. I want you to change the way you live with English, starting today. Surround yourself with English daily. Shadow real speech daily. Consume understandable content daily. Test your memory daily and speak every single day, even imperfectly, because fluency belongs to the people who stay connected to the language long enough for adaptation to happen naturally. And before you leave, I want you to do one simple but powerful thing right now. Say one sentence in English out loud. Any sentence. Maybe I can improve every day. Or English is becoming part of my life. Because that one sentence is more important than you realize. It is the first proof that you are no longer just studying English from a distance. You are beginning to live with it, and that single moment may become the beginning of everything changing for you from this day forward. And when you say that one sentence out loud today, even if your voice shakes a little, even if the grammar is imperfect, even if you still feel nervous inside, I want you to understand something powerful. You are already changing. Because real fluency does not begin the moment you speak perfectly. It begins the moment you stop hiding from the language and start interacting with it consistently every single day. And from now on, I want you to remember this clearly. Immersion is changing your brain every time you hear English. Shadowing is training your mouth every time you repeat real speech. Comprehensible input is building understanding. Every time you consume understandable English. Active recall is strengthening memory. Every time you force yourself to remember naturally. Spaced repetition is locking phrases into your long-term mind every time you revisit them over time. And speaking from day one is slowly destroying the fear that once convinced you to stay silent. And when all of these methods work together day after day, something incredible begins happening beneath the surface. English slowly stops feeling like a difficult school subject and starts becoming part of your identity. Your listening becomes calmer. Your reactions become faster. Your pronunciation becomes more natural. And most importantly, your fear begins disappearing because your brain no longer sees English as something unfamiliar or dangerous. It sees English as something normal, something present, something connected to your real life every single day. And that is the hidden secret behind people who eventually sound fluent naturally. They stayed connected to the language long enough for adaptation to happen automatically. And one day, they suddenly realized they were understanding more, speaking more, and thinking less about translation without even noticing exactly when the transformation began. And that same transformation is possible. For you too, not because you are special, but because the human brain is designed to adapt through repetition, exposure, communication, and emotional familiarity. And from this moment forward, I do not want you to measure your progress only through tests or perfect grammar anymore. Measure it through daily exposure, through how often English enters your life, through how often you listen, repeat, remember, understand, and speak. Because fluency is not built in one dramatic moment. Fluency is built quietly through small daily actions repeated consistently over time. And if you continue using these 5 methods together, immersion, shadowing, comprehensible input, active recall with spaced repetition, and speaking from day one, your future self may one day speak English with a level of comfort and confidence that once felt impossible, all because you stopped trying to study English like a subject and finally started living with English like a real language every single day. So before this video ends, I want you to do one final thing. Take a deep breath. Believe in your ability to adapt and say one sentence in English right now, because that one sentence may become the first step toward a completely different future for you. Dua vào phanh phương pháp này. Immersion, shadowing, comprehensible input, active recall plus spaced repetition. Speak from day one.